Traveler's Heart, the life and legacy of Gertrude Bell. Gertrude Margaret Lothian Bell was born on July 14, 1868, in Washington Hall, County Durham, England, into one of the wealthiest and most distinguished families of the era. Her grandfather, Sir Isaac Lothian Bell, was an industrialist and a baronet, while her father, Hugh Bell, inherited the family's ironworks empire. From the earliest days of her life, Gertrude was surrounded by privilege, but also by a vibrant intellectual energy that would shape her path. Her mother, Mary Shield Bell, passed away when Gertrude was only 3, leaving her father to bring in a new maternal figure. Florence Bell, her stepmother, who was a playwright and an accomplished woman in her own right. Florence's open-mindedness and intellectual curiosity complemented Hugh's encouragement, and together they fostered in Gertrude a fierce independence. The Bell household brimmed with discussions about the world, its politics, its literature, and the unknown corners awaiting exploration. Family gatherings were not merely domestic affairs, they were salons of ideas. Florence's literary leanings led her to introduce Gertrude to the great works of Shakespeare, Milton, and more contemporary thinkers, while Hugh's scientific and industrial background ensured that Gertrude learned how society and technology progressed hand in hand. Gertrude grew up with a voracious appetite for knowledge. By her teenage years, she was devouring books on geography, history, and classics. And though society at that time often encouraged women to focus on more feminine pursuits, the Bell family did nothing to curb her ambitions. Recognizing her bright mind, her father arranged for Gertrude to receive the best education then available to a young Englishwoman. Thus, at the age of 15, Gertrude was sent to Queen's College in London, where she honed her critical thinking skills. In 1886, Gertrude went on to study modern history at Lady Margaret Hall, Oxford, one of the first colleges at Oxford University to admit women. The atmosphere at Oxford proved electric. She relished discussions about the shape of the British Empire and the intricacies of human civilization, making friends with future luminaries of British politics and academia. Gertrude's academic star burned brightly. In 1888, she graduated with first-class honours in modern history, one of the first women to achieve that feat. After Oxford, seeking to refine the edges of her rapidly expanding mind, Gertrude embarked on a journey to Persia, modern-day Iran, in 1892. She travelled to Tehran, where her uncle, Sir Frank Lascelles, was the British ambassador. The dusty roads, vibrant markets, and mesmerizing architecture of the Middle East left an indelible impression. She spent months in Tehran, learning Persian and absorbing the culture with a scholar's zeal and an adventurous soul. Among her earliest passions was the poetry of Hafiz, the 14th-century Persian lyric poet. His verses, celebrating love, spiritual longing, and the beauty of the world, resonated deeply with Gertrude's own emerging worldview. Persia's interplay of ancient traditions and living culture proved such a powerful inspiration that she undertook the study of classical Persian poetry. This study would eventually yield her translation of Hafiz's poems, published in 1897 as Poems from the Divan of Hafiz. Though she was just shy of 30 at the time, Gertrude Bell approached the monumental task of literary translation as she did everything else in her life, methodically, passionately, and with a firm desire to illuminate the beauty and complexity of the region she had come to love. During these early travels, she first displayed the resilience that would become legendary. Much of her time in Persia was spent in the city's bustling bazaars, navigating labyrinthine alleys filled with shimmering textiles, calligraphic scrolls, and tempting aromas from street-side food stalls. She immersed herself in Persian language lessons. Many afternoons were spent conversing with local scholars, for she found a special kinship with those who could guide her deeper into the cultural and literary secrets of the region. Even then, she was stepping beyond the conventions assigned to women of her class, riding into the countryside on horseback, lodging in caravanserais typically filled with merchants and travellers, and making notes in her journals about the politics and society of the region. One evening, as she sat sipping tea with her uncle at the British Embassy, he broached the question of her future travel plans. Sir Frank Lascelles, "My dear Gertrude, word has it you wish to traverse the length of this country come spring, unaccompanied." Gertrude, smiling, "Not entirely alone, uncle. I shall hire local guides to show me the passes, and a translator if needed. But yes, I wish to see the land beyond Tehran. There's so much more to Persia than its capital. Sir Frank Lascelles, concerned, your determination is commendable, but be mindful of the difficulties. Desert nights are cold, and the roads can be inhospitable. Gertrude, as with any great journey, it's the difficulties that make it worthwhile. Her uncle's concern did not dissuade her. Rather, it fueled her determination to see Persia's deserts, mountain passes, and smaller towns. That same spark of exploration would later lead her to the heart of the Middle East, forging alliances and friendships that would influence the future of entire nations. Upon returning to England, Gertrude's thirst for adventure took another form: mountaineering. From the late 1890s into the first decade of the 20th century, she spent many a summer scaling alpine peaks. She conquered some of the most challenging ascents in Switzerland, among them La Meije and the Matterhorn, though never to the summit of the latter. One of her most notable climbs was the Finsteraarhorn in the Bernese Alps. Bell took a particular pride in achieving what many believed a woman could not. Indeed, she would often be the only woman at the base camp. Her diaries brimmed with vivid descriptions of her climbs: the thin air, the sudden crevasses, the sense of triumph upon glimpsing the vast panorama of the Alps from a high ridge. In her mountaineering endeavors, as in her future travels in the Middle East, she demonstrated courage, meticulous planning, and an ability to charm and lead local guides. However exhilarating the alpine vistas were, Gertrude found herself continually drawn to the arid expanses of the Middle East. Beginning in the early 1900s, she commenced a series of travels that would span Syria, Mesopotamia, Iraq, Asia Minor, and the Arabian Peninsula. Dressed in practical desert attire, far from Victorian frills, she would set out on camelback, accompanied by local escorts hired from the tribes whose territories she passed through. In 1905, Gertrude published The Desert and the Sown, detailing her travels in Syria and Arabia. This was followed by Syria, The Desert and the Sown, another edition of her travel narrative, and later Amurath to Amurath, 1911, which recounted her expeditions across the Euphrates. These works, brimming with painstakingly detailed observations of archaeology, tribal customs, and political nuances, quickly established her as an authority on the region. The respect she commanded among local tribes was partly due to her genuine interest in their languages and customs, and partly due to her disarming confidence. Where other Europeans might arrive with a sense of imposed superiority, Gertrude presented herself as a student of the land and its people, a translator of cultures. She would sit under goat-hair tents, share coffee spiced with cardamom, and listen to stories of lineage and past battles. In so doing, she formed friendships that few Western travelers had ever cultivated, particularly among the Arab chieftains in Mesopotamia. During her extensive travels, Gertrude Bell came into contact with a young archaeologist and intelligence officer named Thomas Edward Lawrence, better known to the world as Lawrence of Arabia. Both were scholars of the region, both polyglots, both deeply respectful, if not sometimes critical, of British imperial ambitions. They formed an intellectual camaraderie that would endure during the tumultuous years of World War I and its aftermath. Their first encounter likely took place around 1911 or 1912 in the vicinity of the ancient city of Carchemish, where Lawrence was working as an archaeologist. Gertrude arrived with her usual retinue of guides, a donkey or two laden with survey equipment, and a desert-tanned face that bore the imprint of many months under the Middle Eastern sun. It was said that Lawrence was initially taken aback by her self-assured presence. An English gentlewoman whose knowledge of Arabic dialects surpassed that of many male officials. Lawrence, shaking her hand, "Miss Bell, I've read your travel accounts. I dare say you have seen more of the Syrian desert than I have." Gertrude, with a twinkle in her eye, "Not half as much as I still wish to see, Mr. Lawrence. But what I have seen convinces me there is an Arab world on the cusp of transformations we can scarcely imagine. Lawrence, your insights on tribal alliances and loyalties have been invaluable. I suppose we shall see if the great powers pay them any heed." Gertrude, "We shall. In the meantime, there's much ground still to cover." These casual remarks, though brief, presaged a partnership that would echo through the coming war and the subsequent redrawing of Middle Eastern maps. They both believed that the Arabs had a right to self-determination, though they differed on the finer points of how British policy should steer the region. Nonetheless, they found common cause in building bridges and forging alliances. When World War I erupted in 1914, Gertrude Bell found herself effectively drafted into Britain's imperial policy apparatus. Her unrivaled knowledge of tribal lands and loyalties made her a valuable asset to the British intelligence service in Cairo and Basra. Appointed as a political officer, a rarity for a woman in that age, she provided crucial advice on how best to work with Arab leaders. Alongside T.E. Lawrence, she argued for respecting local autonomy and forging alliances built upon mutual interest rather than brute force. Bell's ability to negotiate with tribal sheikhs and her skill in reading the shifting allegiances of the region led to her being stationed in Basra and later in Baghdad as part of the British administration in Mesopotamia. By 1917, British forces had taken control of Baghdad, and Gertrude Bell was at the administrative centre of the new territory. She was made Oriental Secretary, effectively serving as the crucial liaison between British authorities and the diverse array of Arab communities, Sunni, Shia, Kurdish, and others, that populated Mesopotamia. It was during this period that Gertrude contributed to a series of intelligence reports mapping out the tribal networks and potential leaders who could unify the region under a single governance structure. This was no easy task. The forging of Iraq out of the three Ottoman vilayets, Baghdad, Basra, and Mosul, required delicate negotiation and an understanding of centuries-old enmities and alliances. Bell's cultural sensitivity, gained through years of personal travel, allowed her to navigate these complexities where others might have failed. In March 1921, Winston Churchill, then colonial secretary, convened the Cairo Conference to discuss the future of the Middle East post-Ottoman Empire. Gertrude Bell was one of the few women present and certainly among the most knowledgeable in the room. She advocated for the establishment of an Arab monarchy in Mesopotamia, one that would be sympathetic to British interests, but also legitimate in the eyes of the local population. Lawrence likewise pressed for the same. The result was the selection of Faisal ibn Hussein as King of Iraq. Bell's role in installing Faisal was so instrumental that she was sometimes referred to as the Maker of Kings. Shortly after Faisal assumed the throne in 1921, Bell took part in an audience at the newly established royal palace in Baghdad. The city was alive with possibility, brimming with the energy of new governance. The Euphrates and Tigris rivers, cradles of some of the world's earliest civilizations, flowed on as they had for millennia, now witnessing the birth of a modern nation. King Faisal, rising to greet her, "Miss Bell, your reputation precedes you. They say you know more about Mesopotamia than any of my ministers." Gertrude: "Your Majesty flatters me. I've travelled through these lands and grown fond of their people, yes, but I would never presume to know more than those who have dwelled here for generations." King Faisal, smiling: "Yet it's you who helped guide the British government to choose me as king. For that, I owe a debt of gratitude. I will do my best to govern with wisdom." Gertrude: "And I will help in any way I can to ensure that the people of Iraq see in you a unifying figure. There is much work to be done, especially building trust among the tribes." King Faisal: "Let us build that trust together, Miss Bell. Iraq needs friends, not just rulers." This meeting marked a high point in Bell's political career. She was not merely an observer, she was shaping the destinies of peoples and territories. However, the toll of this responsibility weighed heavily on her. During this period, she came to realize that the Western powers were not always as benevolent as she had hoped. The realities of British mandate governance, with its resource interests and strategic imperatives, often clashed with the aspirations of the Arab population. While King Faisal was well liked by certain segments of society, he was also viewed by others as a British-installed monarch, an outsider from the Hijaz. Gertrude's diaries from the early 1920s reveal her growing anxieties about whether this new state, Iraq, could ever form a cohesive identity. Aside from her diplomatic work, Gertrude Bell also made significant contributions to archaeology and cultural preservation. She believed that Iraq's rich heritage, encompassing ancient Mesopotamian, Babylonian, and Assyrian civilizations, deserved protection and celebration. In 1923, she was instrumental in founding the Baghdad Archaeological Museum, now the Iraq Museum, lobbying fiercely to ensure that local antiquities remained in Iraq rather than being shipped to European museums. She viewed cultural heritage as a bridge between the Western world and the Middle East, one that could foster a mutual respect. Gertrude personally catalogued numerous artifacts, drawing upon her historical and geographical expertise. Scholars from Britain, France, and the United States wrote to consult with her. She played host to visiting professors and archaeologists, forging global partnerships for the preservation of Middle Eastern antiquities. The museum became a passion project that reflected her deepest convictions about the value of cross-cultural understanding. Although much of Gertrude Bell's life was dedicated to intellectual and diplomatic pursuits, she was not immune to the yearnings of the heart. She experienced at least two great loves that ended in heartbreak, fueling a sense of loneliness that permeated her correspondence. Her first serious love interest was Henry Cadogan, a young diplomat she met in Tehran. Their relationship was passionate, but her family disapproved. Cadogan was rumored to have gambling debts. Tragically, he died of pneumonia not long after. Another significant relationship was with Major Charles Doughty Wiley, a British Army officer who was married. They carried on a secret epistolary romance, but he died in 1915 during the Gallipoli campaign. These losses seemed to reinforce her decision to pour herself into work rather than seek personal fulfillment in marriage. Letters from the field often reveal flashes of solitude. I sometimes think that in all the wide desert there is no loneliness like that which sits upon one's heart after the sun has set and the camps are quiet, she wrote in a letter home. And yet in this solitude, I find the very reason I cannot turn away. I see the stars, and I remember how small our quarrels must seem in the cosmos. Such reflections demonstrated her extraordinary ability to hold both the grandeur of the desert and the personal ache of human longing in her mind simultaneously. By the mid-1920s, Gertrude Bell's health had begun to deteriorate. The grueling years spent traveling across deserts, her ceaseless administrative duties, and perhaps her unresolved grief took their toll. She returned to England briefly but found the damp climate oppressive to her spirits. Despite her declining health, she insisted on returning to Baghdad, her spiritual home. In 1926, just a year before her death, she revisited the archaeological site at guided by Leonard Woolley, the famous archaeologist, and his wife Catherine. She climbed among the ziggurat ruins, collecting notes for her continuing work on Mesopotamian history, yet observers noted that she seemed physically frail, as if the desert had exacted its final tax upon her body. Still, her conversations with the Woolleys were animated, filled with the same restless intellect that had once led her to scale the Alps and traverse the dunes of Arabia. On the night of July 11, 1926, Gertrude Bell passed away in Baghdad from an overdose of sleeping pills, which many suspected was intentional, an act of despair or exhaustion. She was 57 years old. The city she had helped shape mourned her passing. She was buried at the British cemetery in the Bab al-Sharji district of Baghdad, in a funeral attended by Iraqi officials and British colleagues alike. Tributes poured in from across the world, acknowledging her essential role in modern Iraqi statehood, her scholarly brilliance, and her peerless command of the region's tribal politics. Gertrude Bell left behind an extraordinary legacy that continues to invite admiration and debate. Throughout her life, she wore many hats: writer, traveler, archaeologist, diplomat, and spy. She moved with ease through circles of power typically closed to women, shaping the course of history in ways few individuals, male or female, ever do. Her literary works, including her translations of Hafiz and her travelogues, remain valuable documents of cultural and historical insights. Her diaries and letters, meticulously preserved, offer an intimate glimpse into the heart of a woman driven by curiosity, a thirst for discovery, and a willingness to engage with the unfamiliar on its own terms. Historians continue to assess her role in the creation of modern Iraq, sometimes criticizing her alignment with British imperial interests that inevitably led to tensions among various ethnic and sectarian groups. Yet few deny that she approached her mission with genuine respect for the Arab peoples and with the hope of forging a stable and independent Iraqi nation. She navigated a treacherous landscape of competing interests, from local tribal politics to grand European strategies, guided by an intense conviction that cross-cultural dialogue was not only possible but necessary. It was this conviction, perhaps, that shines brightest. In an era when women rarely ventured beyond the role of wife or mother, at least in upper-class British society, Gertrude Bell charted her own course, literally and metaphorically. She was a mountaineer in a land of constraints, always seeking the summit, the vantage point from which she could see more clearly. And from those summits, whether they were alpine peaks or dunes on the edge of the Mesopotamian desert, she brought back invaluable knowledge, forging connections between East and West. If you walk through the old sections of Baghdad even now, or visit the windswept ruins of Babylon, whispers of Gertrude Bell's presence remain. Local lore remembers al-Khatun, a term of respect for a woman of authority, who travelled unafraid, speaking the language of tribesmen and kings. The museum she helped establish still displays fragments of ancient civilizations, cuneiform tablets, pottery shards, stone reliefs from palaces millennia old, each a testament to the region's rich past and Bell's desire to see it preserved in its own land. Travelers who open Bell's books today find not just descriptions of archaeology or politics, but a rare empathy. She wrote of the nuances in tribal hierarchies, the shifting desert sands, the mesmerizing call to prayer at dawn. She showed how geography and culture could intertwine to form something larger than any single empire's ambitions. And in her translations of Hafiz, she imbued English readers with a glimmer of the Persian mystic's longing for transcendence, a longing that perhaps mirrored her own quest for connection in distant lands. The intellectual partnership she forged with T.E. Lawrence remains a remarkable episode in the history of Western involvement in the Middle East, two minds attracted by the same horizon, both aware of how precarious it was to shape nations that had their own rightful aspirations. Their dialogues, preserved partially in letters, reveal both a hope for Arab self-determination and a resignation that European powers might not relinquish their strategic hold so easily. And so Gertrude Bell's story is one of paradox. She was an imperial official who championed local autonomy, a woman in a man's world, a translator of ancient Persian poetry, and a champion of Iraqi antiquities. She stood at the crossroads of culture and conquest, advocating for voices that might otherwise have been silenced. When she died, many in Iraq mourned her as a friend, while many in Britain hailed her as a pioneer. Her life defies easy categorization, which is perhaps why it continues to captivate historians, biographers, and adventurous spirits alike. In the end, Gertrude Bell's devotion to the Middle East transcended simple professional interest. She seemed to belong there, under the vast sky that stretched from Damascus to Baghdad, from the golden domes of Samarra to the bustling souks of Aleppo. The mesmerizing calls of the muezzins, the swirling dust devils on the plains, the taste of strong sweet tea in a Bedouin tent, all of it spoke to a part of her that England never could. She was the desert's daughter as much as she was an English heiress. Perhaps it was the sense of unbounded possibility that drew her, the idea that one could lose oneself in endless dunes or explore ancient caravan routes not yet trod by the footprints of modern tourism. In her letters, she wrote how the desert calmed her mind in a way no English garden ever did. And in the final chapters of her life, she chose to be buried in Baghdad, the city that had become her second home. Gertrude Bell's biography is more than a chronicle of one woman's achievements. It is a tapestry of cultures, politics, literature, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. Her life serves as a testament to what can be accomplished when curiosity marries courage, and when one approaches the unfamiliar not with fear, but with a spirit of open dialogue. From the grand halls of Oxford to the dust-laden caravans of the Arabian desert, she blazed a trail that still inspires. That she remains a complex figure is fitting for a life lived at the confluence of so many worlds. In her diaries, we glimpse a sensitive soul grappling with the burdens of colonial power. In her museum work, we see a scholar determined to preserve the cultural treasures of a newly formed nation. And in her myriad journeys, on camelback, horseback, or foot, we see an intrepid explorer, unstoppable in her determination to seek understanding across cultural divides. Gertrude Bell's story resonates in our modern age as questions of cultural identity, self-determination, and international relations remain pressing. By acknowledging both her accomplishments and the complexities of her role in British imperialism, we can better understand the complicated legacy of Western involvement in the Middle East. Bell was neither entirely a hero nor a villain. She was a human being of singular drive, shaped by her time, yet often straining against its limitations. She left behind volumes of work, travelogues, letters, and translations of Hafiz, that allow us to piece together her intellect, her empathy, and her contradictions. To read Hafiz through Gertrude Bell's translations is to stand briefly in her shoes, gazing upon an ancient poet's wisdom with the fresh eyes of a 19th-century Englishwoman enthralled by Persian culture. Her translations do not always match the modern academic standard, yet they reflect the soulful curiosity that drove her to connect Western readers with the East's timeless verses. The dialogues presented in this biography are dramatizations, yet they capture the spirit of how Gertrude Bell engaged with others, warmly, incisively, and often with a fearless directness. Whether speaking with a British official or a Bedouin chief, she was never content to be a silent observer. She probed, questioned, and formed opinions that would influence British policy at the highest levels. And so, as the modern traveller stands atop the same dunes that Gertrude Bell once crossed, they might feel a certain kinship with her spirit. The warm desert breeze, the far-off silhouette of a caravan, the hum of an ancient land that has seen empires rise and fall. These are the constants that bind past and present. In them, one hears an echo of Bell's voice, softly reminding us that no adventure is truly impossible if one has the courage to begin. And that understanding is the rarest and most precious commodity we can carry across the shifting sands of cultural divides.